So there was a bit of controversy around Mercedes during the Brazilian Grand Prix this weekend between the two different starts, between the initially attempted start and what eventually became the start of the actual race. Mercedes changed their tyre pressures on the Formula 1 grid. Now this normally is a breach of Parc Fermé regulations, and as Mercedes know all too well, particularly George Russell, if you breach Parc Fermé regulations during the Grand Prix weekend, you will be disqualified. Not a time penalty, not a fine, you'll be kicked out of the race, just like what happened to Russell when his car was underweight at the Belgian Grand Prix earlier this year. And indeed, like Mercedes had their driver Lewis Hamilton disqualified from the United States Grand Prix last year for wearing down the plank, that is also another breach of Parc Fermé regulations. It's making the car not in a state that is deemed to be legal for competing in the race. But they've managed to escape any kind of sporting penalty for this. They've not been disqualified from the Brazilian Grand Prix. They've not been given a time penalty, no penalty points, nothing like that. Mercedes have instead been given two separate €5,000 fines, so €10,000 in total for breaching the regulations. But why is this? How have they managed to do this? Well, there's a few factors at play as to why they've managed to argue that their cars were allowed to be altered in this way during the race. So I'll just go into what they've gone and said here. So the FIA said the following in a statement after the race. They said, after the race start was aborted, the 10-minute notice was immediately given for a new start. Given the layout of the circuit, this is Interlagos in Brazil, and the access point to the grid from the pit lane, the time period for the team to get to the grid was extended. The gate to access the grid was not immediately open. The FIA accepted that given this short notice, it was extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the teams to follow the procedure prescribed in the technical directive. They also added, given the unusual circumstances surrounding the compressed timetable, aborted start, the grid access logistics, and given the stipulation from the technical delegate that the tyre pressures were within the correct parameters, the stewards determined that a fine for the breach of the procedures is appropriate in this case. Normally a breach of this nature within a competitive session would carry a sporting penalty, but it's not appropriate in this case. However, this decision should not be considered as a precedent for similar breaches in the future, as the circumstances are considered unique. So yeah, there's a few things going on here. So basically, there are certain things that you can change when it comes to your car when it's in Parc Fermé regulations. Things like your front wing angle and stuff like that. You'll see cars quite regularly, especially in a wet race like we saw in Brazil, where they'll have their front wing angle adjusted during pit stops. That's absolutely fine, but tyre pressures is something that you can't go changing like that. Now, again, the reason why they've escaped a punishment of this one is because of Interlagos' circuit. Now, I don't know the access lanes and stuff like that. I don't know how the actual layout from the pit lane to the actual circuit is divided, but by the sounds of things, because it's very uphill and because of the way that access is kind of created, it does make it difficult to do that. Now, they've also added that even though they changed the tyre pressures, these tyre pressures were within the rules. They were not too high or too low. They were within the acceptable boundaries of such. So that sense, it wasn't a problem. Like, George Russell and Lewis Hamilton did not gain a performance advantage from it. Now, of course, you can argue that, yes, well, they changed the tyre pressures. Surely they did that to be faster. And yes, of course, they would have done so to be faster. But at the end of the day, the weather conditions were changing. They'd already done effectively 2 reconnaissance laps with 2 formation laps, one being the initial one and then the second one as well on top of that, which that's another separate thing. I've already gone into the penalties thing, because Lando Norris and George Russell have been given penalties for that too and escaped serious punishment in that one as well. So go check out the video on that. That'll be out at the same time as this one, I imagine, will be as well. But yeah, it's interesting they've managed to escape punishment aside from just a fine for this one. I think on the balance of play, it's probably the right decision, but I know there's going to be some people saying, well, shouldn't they be disqualified from this? And I understand that viewpoint. I do. I really do get where people are coming from with that one, but I personally don't think that would be the right thing to do for a few reasons. One, I think it's an incredibly harsh punishment for it, because it's not like George Russell with his car being too light in Belgium again disqualified. Like, his car was too light, therefore his car was outside of the acceptable parameters, effectively, to use the stewards' own terminology that they've used for this punishment. Yes, they changed the tyre pressures with this between the 2 different starts, but they were not outside of the accepted parameters, so the car was legal. you could argue that it was illegally changed because of that. Now, because again, and without being a F1 mechanic out on the grid, I don't know how difficult it is, but the stewards clearly accept the viewpoint that there wasn't enough time to practically change the tyres in another way, because to change the whole of the tyres and everything, like to get them out of the garage and get them ready, it does take time. It's not like in a pit stop where it's like 2-3 seconds or whatever. It takes time to get them all out onto the grid, get them all set up and everything like that. It's not a quick process at all. So again, I understand why they've done that. But I also think, yeah, potentially they could have got a serious punishment for this, but they've managed to escape it. But like I said, I think overall it's probably right on the balance of things. And the most important point for me, just speaking as a fan as well, I don't want to be leaving the track. I don't want fans to be leaving the track, and I don't want us to be switching off the TV, not knowing the result of the race. Now, of course, in truth, because these investigations were going on far after what the race finished out, they went on for a good 3 hours, I think. It was a long time. It was after I went to sleep, I think, all these decisions went through. So because of that, it's not ideal. You don't want to be leaving the track not knowing the result, and we didn't, in truth. We didn't. But having that change later on is bad. I mean, as bad as it was with George Russell getting disqualified, which I think was the correct decision, unfortunately, for Mercedes, but that decision came pretty quickly. It was like 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, which again isn't ideal, but at least it didn't take hours. Like we've had Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, the decision about them in Austria in 2019, I think it was. Not long ago, 5 years ago. That was decided like 2-3 hours, and that was just an overtake. That wasn't like a technical infringement or whatever, So that's my kind of thoughts on it, guys. It's not ideal, but I understand what they've done. I understand why they've done it. I understand why the stewards have not handed out a serious penalty to Russell or Hamilton on this one, just a fine for Mercedes. But I'm sure there's going to be some people disagreeing with that. So I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did Mercedes get away with it? Did they get lucky at the Brazilian Grand Prix to escape a bigger punishment, a disqualification, a time penalty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, keep it subscribed to the F1Chronicle.com. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Ring the bell as well. And we'll see you very soon, guys. Have a good one.